people's land. And what this means is that Job probably wasn't Jewish. Well, he followed God, he followed the Lord, but he wasn't a Jew, probably in descent. He probably didn't have Jewish parents and didn't grow up in the Jewish synagogues and temples or tabernacles or whatever they were doing at the time, and didn't learn all those things and understand all those things from his culture, from his history. He was in a different culture with different philosophies and different theologies. The way they thought about God was also going to be different as a result. But we learn some more about Job because we learn he was blameless, a man of complete integrity. He feared God and he stayed away from evil. So even though he probably didn't have the upbringing that would help him learn about God, he still feared God. And as a result of this, he was blameless. He was complete integrity. We know he probably wasn't perfect, but he was blameless. And along with being blameless, along with being of complete integrity, Job was also very blessed. He was blessed with 7 sons and 3 daughters, and he owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 teams of oxen, and 500 female donkeys. He also had many servants. He was, in fact, the richest person in that entire area. Job was as blessed as you can get. He was the richest person. He was the most blessed. And what's important to understand about this is that I alluded to the different philosophy and theology of that culture. And one of the markers of it was that if you lived a good life, God was going to bless you. And if you lived a bad life, you had sins, you weren't blameless, well then God was going to punish you. This is the way they thought about the world. It's not the way we think about the world, but it's the way they thought about the world. So with Job being the richest person and the most blessed, logically speaking, Job would have been the best person. He would have been the most blameless, the most perfect person. But as we know, that's not exactly how the world works. 2020's probably shown you that bad things can happen to good things can happen to bad people. Life can get hard. That's because the power of sin is prevalent in the world. And with that, Job had many problems. Job's life was not as perfect anymore. I alluded to earlier Job's very, very bad day. Well, it began here. It began with Satan taking everything. Because Job had all these things happen, and one day a messenger came to Job and ran in and said, Job, some robbers came, they took all your sheep, they took all of your animals, and they killed a whole bunch of people. And I was the only one to escape to tell you. And then another messenger came running in and said, Job, a fire came and it burned down a whole bunch of your land, and it killed all your shepherds and all your sheep, and I was the only one to escape to tell you. And then while he was still speaking, another messenger, a third messenger, arrived with this news. Your sons and daughters were feasting in their oldest brother's home. Suddenly, a powerful wind swept in from the wilderness and hit the house on all sides. The house collapsed, and all your children are dead. That's a bad day. Not only did Job lose all his animals, all his property, but now he's lost all his kids. He's lost just about everything. On top of that, Satan keeps going at him and makes him sick, and he ends up with boils and has an illness. So on top of all of this, he's also ill. But he still has a wife. He has one thing left. But as I'm sure you can imagine, especially if you're married, things going this badly can put some strain on a marriage. And it certainly did. His wife said to him, "Are you still trying to maintain your integrity? Curse God and die." His wife was not very happy with the God that Job followed and didn't understand why Job would continue to follow him and continue to try to lift God up and do the right thing and be blameless in the midst of all that, as she thought, God was doing to Job. Because once again, in their understanding, God was the one doing this to Job. They didn't understand that it was Satan. They thought Job was being punished. So according to their own theology, their own philosophy, the way they understood the world, this is actually the logical response. Curse God and die would make sense if you thought about the world the way Job did. Because if you thought about the way the world works the way Job did, well then Job knew he was blameless and thought God was punishing him. And if this God was punishing him even though he was without sin, he should curse God. But Job was humble enough. He said, "You talk like a foolish woman. Should we accept only good things from God, from the hand of God, and never anything bad?" Job was humble enough to realize maybe he didn't have all the answers. And maybe we shouldn't quite curse God just because some bad things happened. Now, his theology is a little warped here because, once again, the punishment is coming from the hand of God, which it didn't, but to Job it did. And he probably shouldn't have said, "You talk like a foolish woman" to his wife. I've been told that's a bad thing to say. So his theology was warped, and he didn't handle this perfectly. But Job still knew it wasn't right to curse God for this. So Satan had taken everything from Job. Job's marriage was in a little bit of struggles. His wife's telling him to curse God. And then finally, he's got some friends with some bad theology. Now, his friends started off doing the right thing. They came from all over, 3 different tribes. So Job's from Uz, and then he's got these 3 friends that come from 3 different tribes and just sit with him for a week. They mourn with him, they grieve with him, and they just let it be. They mourned with the person who needed to mourn. But then they got a little off track because they started trying to fix the problem, because to them, Job was being punished, which means Job must have done something wrong. So they tried to get to the bottom of it, and they were trying to be helpful. They kept asking Job, "What have you done wrong? Why is God cursing you? What's this sin that was committed? What is this sin that your kids committed? If we can get rid of that, we can get rid of the punishment that's being inflicted upon you." And Job, as someone who was innocent, denies this, saying, "I haven't done anything wrong. God can't be cursing me for something I did wrong. I haven't done anything wrong." And his friends get increasingly angry and accusatory at Job, and Job responds being more and more vehemently defending himself because he hasn't done anything wrong, but his friends are convinced he must have done something wrong. And it comes to a head when one of his friends says, "Is it because you're so pious that God, accuses you and brings judgment against you? Is it because you're so perfect that God would judge you?" No, of course not. That doesn't make sense. It's because of your wickedness, Job. There's no limit to your sins. Even though Job was blameless, his friends continued to try and convince him that he must have done something wrong, or God wouldn't punish him. This led to what I call Job's anguish. Eventually, Job stops responding to his friends and starts responding to God. And he prays this to God, not actually the prayer we're focusing on, but he prays this: "I cry to you, O God, but you don't answer. I stand before you, but you don't even look. You have become cruel towards me. You use your power to persecute me." Job is angry with God. Job doesn't understand why God would be doing this to him. He wasn't, but he didn't understand why God would persecute him like this, why God would be cruel towards him and allow and cause all these bad things to happen. He didn't get it, and he's angry with God because of it. And we finally then hear from God. Because, well, Job's angry with God. God is now angry with Job. And God even challenges Job. Now, I didn't put these on the slides because I want you to hear what God says to Job. And this takes place over the course of 4 chapters, Job 38 through 41. And it's heavy. And it's hard. But God challenges Job. It starts in chapter 38. Who is this that questions my wisdom with such ignorant words? Brace yourself like a man, because I have some questions for you, and you must answer them. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me, if you know so much, who determined its dimensions and stretched out the surveying line? What supports its foundation, and who laid its cornerstone? As the morning stars sang aloud and all the angels shouted for joy. This goes on for 41 verses. Then it goes into chapter 39, which in my Bible is titled, The Lord's Challenge Continues. The Lord's Challenge continues. Do you know when the wild goats give birth? Have you watched as deer are born in the wild? Do you know how many months they carry their young? Are you aware of the time of their delivery? And this goes on for 30 verses of chapter 39. And then chapter 40 says, Then the Lord said to Job, Do you still want to argue with the Almighty? You are God's critic, but do you have the answers? God finally allows Job the space to respond. After two chapters of just challenging Job and challenging Job and challenging Job and saying, How dare you think you know better than me? You weren't there when I created the world. You weren't sustaining the world like I am. Job replies to the Lord, I am nothing. How could I ever find the answers? I will cover my mouth with my hand. I have said too much already. I have nothing more to say. But God had more to say. He says, Brace yourself like a man, because I have some questions for you, and you must answer them. Will you discredit my justice and condemn me just to prove you are right? Are you as strong as God? Can you thunder with a voice like his? And this continues for 24 verses of chapter 40, and then 34 verses of chapter 41. So after